Okay, guys, let's keep talking about hormones. So let's start this video by talking about hormone regulation. Now, we mentioned that hormones are a major player in maintaining homeostasis within the body. But hormones need to be regulated themselves. And if you go back to an idea that we spoke about way back in our first unit, we talked about negative and positive feedback loops. Well, for a lot of hormonal control, we're going to see hormones controlled by negative feedback loops. So our endocrine glands, for example, they'll secrete a hormone, and they generally tend to excrete too much. Generally, you get a little bit too much hormone being released. Um, This will eventually lead the tissue, the target tissue, to respond, and then that response by the target tissue causes that hormone to stop being secreted. That's an example of a negative feedback loop. So we have a cause, um, then we have an effect, which is the hormone release, and then that effect stops the cause. So that's what we refer to as a negative feedback loop. Much less common is a positive feedback loop, and that's where a hormone is released and it causes a reaction, which causes further hormone to be released. So instead of turning the hormone off, which is we'd see in a negative feedback, the hormone gets turned on, or the secretion increases. That's an example of a positive feedback loop. Now, they're very rare in nature. There's probably only one or two examples that we'll talk about for that. Um, Other secretions will follow a rhythmic control. In those cases, you'll see stuff like sleeping, for example. So every so often we will feel tired, and that's because of hormone regulation. And another really rhythmic one, and that's one that's quite predictable, is a menstrual cycle, and that will go on a rhythmic form of regulation. So let's have a quick look at an example of this. So this is the most common form, a negative feedback loop. And in this case, we're going to be talking about the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the thyroid gland. So we've got those three structures that we're going to be talking about. We'll talk about a couple of different hormones as well. So the hypothalamus is the part of the nervous system that helps innervate the endocrine system. So it's basically the control center of the endocrine system is in the brain, and it's the form of the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus has so much control because it controls the pituitary gland. And we'll talk more about this in a second, but the pituitary gland is often called the master gland. So, like I said, we'll come back to that in a second. But if we look at our feedback loop up here, we get our hypothalamus, which secretes a hormone called TRH. TRH is a releasing hormone for thyroid hormones, so TRH. So the TRH comes from the hypothalamus, and it has an influence on the anterior pituitary gland. The anterior pituitary gland will release a hormone called thyroid stimulating hormone. So that hormone will travel to the thyroid, and that will cause the thyroid to release the hormones that are secreted or that are produced in the thyroid. Now, we usually call those T3 and T4. There are other names for them, a little bit more complicated, but we'll try and keep it simple. So those hormones are released, the T3 and T4, and they do what they're supposed to do. Thyroid has a role in increasing our metabolism. So once those hormones are released, our metabolism goes up. And just the presence of those hormones, these T3 and T4, once that travels back to the pituitary gland, it'll cause that secretion of the thyroid stimulating hormone to shut down. As a result of that, you're also going to see the release, or sorry, the shutdown or the slowdown of the initial hormone, the thyroid releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. So a negative feedback loop where we have a hormone being secreted. Once that hormone is secreted and it starts its action, the fact that that hormone was secreted turns off the hormone that caused it to be secreted in the first place. So that's an example of a negative feedback loop. Okay, so let's start looking at the anatomy of some of the and physiology of some of these glands that we'll find in the endocrine system. Now, this is not exactly, I guess, an endocrine gland, although it does have an endocrine function, but this is actually a part of the brain. The hypothalamus is a section in the brain that has a connection between the nervous system and the endocrine system. So this hypothalamus, the part of the brain, remember hypo means below, so this is the part that are directly below the thalamus, so the hypothalamus. This is going to get signals from the autonomic nervous system. So the part of the nervous system that's not under conscious control. You don't think about this part of the nervous system. This looks kind of after itself. And what the hypothalamus does is it sends signals to the pituitary gland. Now, the pituitary gland is a very important endocrine gland because it secretes a lot of hormones that have control over basically all of the endocrine system. So the pituitary gland is often called the master gland because of the number of hormones it secretes and the fact that the hormones that it secretes controls most of the rest of the endocrine system. But back in the hypothalamus, this is where we're going to have our set points for our homeostatic levels. That means the hypothalamus knows what a normal or a regular metabolic set point is. So the regular temperature that we should have, the regular fluid balance, our normal blood pressure, our body weight, hunger, appetite, hormones that need to be released, sexual behavior. All of this stuff is set in the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus can help control all of these homeostatic functions by causing hormones to be released from the pituitary gland. So the hypothalamus is the neural tissue that helps control the endocrine system. Now it says there it contains neurosecretory tissue, which means that it has a controlling function. It can secrete neurotransmitters, also hormones that will help control the endocrine system. So from the hypothalamus itself, it produces two distinct hormones. ADH, or antidiuretic hormone. A lot of these hormones are going to have really long names, so they're often referred to as an abbreviation. So in this case, antidiuretic hormone becomes ADH. And this is a hormone that will control water levels in our plasma, in our interstitial fluid, in our bodies in general. And it does that by having an effect on the kidneys and the physiological way that they make urine. So that's one hormone that it produces, antidiuretic hormone. And then the other hormone produced is oxytocin. Now this has an effect on females. It stimulates the contraction of the uterus, and that will occur during birth, of course. And it also stimulates the production of milk in the mammary glands when the baby is developing and after the baby is born. Now, interesting, both of these hormones are produced in the hypothalamus, but they pass through and they get excreted through the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. So not only does the hypothalamus have a connection in terms of the nervous system controlling the endocrine system, it also secretes two hormones that are ultimately released from the pituitary gland. So here are some of the hormones that are released from the hypothalamus. Now, I'm only really concerned with you guys knowing about these two here, okay? Like we talked about on the last slide, ADH and oxytocin. So you should know what those two are. The rest of these hormones here, corticotropin releasing hormones, dopamine, growth hormone releasing hormone, somatostatin, gonadotropin releasing hormone, and thyrotropin releasing hormone. This was the one, TRH, that we talked about in our negative feedback loop example a few slides back. If you notice, most of these are going to be releasing hormones. So what happens in this case is the hormone is secreted from the hypothalamus. It only travels to the pituitary gland, and then the pituitary gland will release that particular hormone. So I'm not too concerned about you guys knowing about these releasing hormones, just the fact that the hypothalamus has a direct role to play on releasing hormones from the pituitary gland. Okay, so the first real gland we're going to look at is the pituitary gland. So there's other couple of words for this. You'll often find it called the hypophysis or the master gland. Um, so it's located in a depression in the sphenoid bone, and it connects to the hypothalamus via a structure like a thin section of tissue called the infundibulum. It kind of hangs down like a little sac below the hypothalamus. Now, it's controlled by the hypothalamus, like we just mentioned, because the hypothalamus has nervous connection with it, so it has neurons that flow through, and then it also has all those releasing hormones that interact between the hypothalamus and the pituitary. And one of those examples, and I said to you guys, I don't really want to worry you guys with the releasing hormones, but growth hormone, releasing hormone, obviously if that's released by the hypothalamus, it travels to the pituitary, and that causes the pituitary to release growth hormone. And that's kind of how these are regulated. Now, the pituitary is divided into two lobes, the anterior lobe, which produces most of the hormones, and the posterior lobe, which produces the two hormones that are secreted by the hypothalamus. So if we look at the anterior lobe, we've got 5 hormones that are secreted there: growth hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, and adrenocorticoid hormone. Now those are all abbreviated, so I said the long words, but the abbreviations are there. So GH, TSH, FSH, LH, and ACTH. So those hormones are all released from the anterior lobe of the pituitary. The posterior lobe is going to be responsible for secreting the ADH, the antidiuretic hormone, and the oxytocin. Now, both of those were produced in the hypothalamus, but they get released through the pituitary. So here's a look at the six hormones that are secreted by the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland. So we've got 6 up here and 2 down here. So these are the hormones, and this is what they do. We've got growth hormone, and growth hormone has a wide range of activity throughout almost all tissues in the body, and it promotes growth. Okay. That one's fairly straightforward. The next one we have is thyroid stimulating hormone. This is going to be released by the pituitary, and it's going to travel to the thyroid, and then it's going to cause the thyroid to release the hormones produced there. Adrenocorticoid hormone. This is going to stimulate the adrenal cortex, which is a part of the adrenal gland that is on the top of the kidneys. We get another hormone called prolactin, PRL. That's going to be a hormone that helps stimulate milk, and that's in the female, so it helps development of the mammary glands. The next one, FSH, is a hormone called follicular stimulating hormone, and in females this is going to help stimulate the ovarian follicles, which are eventually going to produce mature eggs. And this hormone in males is going to help in sperm development. And then the last one from the anterior section of the pituitary is LH, or luteinizing hormone. And in the female, this is going to cause development of the corpus luteum, which is a really important structure when we talk about ovulation and the menstrual cycle. Then we get to the posterior lobe of the pituitary, and we get back to those 2 hormones we talked about in the hypothalamus. So the antidiuretic hormone, which helps us reabsorb water from the kidney tubules, and the oxytocin, which is going to be a hormone involved with contractions of the uterus during childbirth, as well as milk development and milk ejection later when the baby's born. Okay, so what we'll have a quick look at here is our hypothalamus up here. So this is going to be our hypothalamus. This whole section here is going to be the pituitary gland. We get the anterior lobe here, and then this is going to be the posterior lobe. And then we can see all of the hormones that are being released from the different lobes of the pituitary. So we've got our 6 hormones released from the anterior, and then we get our 2 hormones that are released from the posterior. Now, each one of these is going to show what part of the body that hormone has an effect on.